Greetings. In the first conversation that we had about Mahatma Gandhi, I focused on who he was, and I emphasized the fact that I think we need to understand him in his native habitat, if you will, and use Indian categories to explain who he was, namely what we call a God-conscious human being, someone who had eradicated every trace of selfishness and self-will inside of himself and made himself kind of a conduit for divine power, and that he fitted into a category that would be recognizable among spiritually sophisticated Indians, which namely was the category of someone who accomplished what he did, his final illumination, through what they call karma yoga, or the path of selfless action. What's unusual about Gandhi, but somehow very fitting for the 20th century, is that karma yoga is very rare. It's very rare that a person has achieved his standing, practically to be considered an avatar, through the path of selfless action. But he did it because I think this is what we need to know in our age. And I've often recommended the text that he based so much of his life on. The Bhagavad Gita has beautiful descriptions of how a human being can act. In fact, there's one place in the Gita where it says there are only three things that you need to know. Who are you, who is God, and what is the nature of action? So in another conversation, I actually went into that. But I'd like to get back to Gandhi now. And I'd like to start with a quote not from an Indian guru or from Albert Einstein, but of all the unlikely people, General Douglas MacArthur, who said, if we are ever going to get out of this situation of trying to regulate international disagreements through violent force, we have got to come to Gandhi's belief. So that was General MacArthur saying that, and I can get you the exact words later. We have got to come to Gandhi's belief. So it is perhaps not too surprising that a military person would see the power and the validity of what Gandhi was doing at a relatively early period. Because Gandhi said, I can make a satyagrahi, that was his term for a nonviolent warrior. We'll get back to that term in just a minute. I can make a satyagrahi out of a violent person. I can make a nonviolent actor out of a violent person. I cannot make a nonviolent actor out of a coward. So someone who has the courage to face death has the rough and ready makings of being a nonviolent actor. You just have to know how to turn that around. And you may remember that scene in Richard Attenborough's famous feature film, Gandhi, where he says, this too is a cause for which I am prepared to die, but, my friend, there is no cause for which I am prepared to kill. That is the essential shift. To take that willingness to risk and to say to yourself, I will do this without inflicting harm on anyone for any reason. Then what you experience is what Martin Luther King called unearned suffering, and he said unearned suffering is redemptive. But let me get back a second to that word satyagraha, because it's a key to what Gandhi was discovering. I've heard many people tell me that Gandhi must have gotten his whole philosophy from Kant or who knows where, and even more, many people believe that he got his nonviolence from Thoreau and or Tolstoy. He explicitly said he did not get the idea of civil disobedience from Thoreau. He got the word from Thoreau after he had been doing it for a while. I'm not sure how important this is, but I think it is very useful for us to recognize that he came as a representative of a very deep and very powerful tradition. In fact, I see Gandhi as arriving on the scene in India in exactly the same way that Jesus arrives on the scene in ancient Palestine, in ancient Israel. That is at a moment when a very precious cultural discovery, namely in Jesus' case, the discovery of monotheism, and in Gandhi's case, the discovery of the inward search for human fulfillment, was about to be lost. And it's about to be lost in very parallel ways. In Jesus' case, it's because the Romans, the representatives of Western culture, are beginning to make the Jews feel that their belief in God was not valid. Just as in India, the British Raj was beginning to make Indians feel that their belief in inner reality was not valid. And so this is a historic occasion when somebody of that stature comes to set humanity back on the right path. I mean, I don't think it's an exaggeration to see the importance of those two individuals in that way. So if we wanted to look for the essence of the belief that Gandhi was trying to rescue, he did embody it in this word satyagraha. And it was formed in a contest in 1908 because people were calling what he was doing passive resistance. Well, you know, that's okay, except it wasn't passive and it wasn't always resistance. And they were comparing it to the women's suffrage movement in England, and he pointed out they are willing to use force if they can. That makes a black and white principle difference between them and what we're doing here. I mean, God bless them, I hope they succeed, but we are not willing to use force under any circumstances, not hurt anyone, not use violence. We are forcing ourselves to work out a way to bring about social change without grabbing onto that facile, knee-jerk solution of hurt people, make them go away, threaten them, and then we'll be okay. So, but this is based on a core concept of satya, or truth. In fact, of an even more simple root word, sat, which actually is a relative of our word is. In other words, it is the word that means being. And in the Sanskrit tradition, it had come to have three very powerful strands of meaning. Sat, or satya, means the true as opposed to false, but it also means real as opposed to unreal, and simultaneously it means good as opposed to evil, as opposed to something that is not good. Those three were fused into one word and one belief system. And the rest of the word is also pretty simple. The after satya means towards me, and graha means to grab, actually. They're related. Graha and grab are related words. And so satyagraha gives you the image that you're just going to cling to the truth and hold on to it no matter what. So let's jump to a little episode now. Let's jump to an episode that takes place in the U.S., in the Civil Rights Movement in Birmingham. I think it's 1956. And there's a group of marchers who are heading for City Hall, and they're blocked by a line of police and firemen. This episode is in my book, The Search for a Nonviolent Future. Some of you may be familiar with it from there. The marchers did not know that the police and the firemen were going to be there blocking their way. They come up against them and they don't know what to do. Because they have a kind of spiritual, not a kind of, they have a spiritual orientation. A lot of their strength is coming from their religious beliefs. Spontaneously, they decided to kneel down on the sidewalk and pray. So they do that for a while. I mean, how long can you kneel on the sidewalk in Birmingham? You know, it's kind of hot. But seriously, after a while, as one of them put it, a kind of spiritual intoxication came over them. Before they knew it, without anybody giving a signal, they continued their walk right into that line of police and firemen. Now, it happened that the person in charge of the police and firemen was a very committed segregationist, kind of very well known to movement historians. His name was Bull Connor, police commissioner. And when he saw the marchers recommencing their advance and moving toward the police and firemen, he gave the order. He said, "Turn on the hoses." Nothing happened. He said it again, "Turn on the hoses." Amazingly, the firemen's hands were frozen on the nozzles. They literally could not turn those hoses on. Some people said that when they were walking through that line, they saw the firemen crying. And incidentally, that's not uncommon because of the tension that is set up in a person when he dehumanizes you, but you act nonviolently and assert your humanity and the humanity of the other person. There's a kind of psychological tension that leads to shaking, that leads to crying. It shows you the depth to which a person can be affected by a nonviolent actor if you know what you're doing. So they walked up to these police and firemen and they said, "How do you feel about what you're doing?" They said, "You know why we're here? We're here to get our freedom, and we are not going back." So on the one hand, that iron determination, on the other hand, not disrespect for the opponent as a person, the determination coupled with an ability to risk suffering of oneself rather than inflict suffering on others, that is the magic formula for what we call a nonviolent moment. A nonviolent moment is where you bring nonviolent power to bear, it confronts violent power, and it prevails, almost always. How does that work? It works, Gandhi had this deep belief that this core of satya, or truth, is in every one of us. When I am trying to abuse you, or be unjust towards you, or disrespect you, I'm not seeing that core in you. And you know what? It's kind of covered over in myself also. What you do when you behave nonviolently, especially as we can see in this dramatic episode, is you hold up a mirror. Remember I was talking last time about how Gandhi was a mirror for the greatest potential within the human being? Well, in a little way, we're holding up a little shard of that mirror and saying to that person, I am not what you think I am. I am part of you. I'm reflecting back to you the best that you also could be. Now, in the last 20 years, we've discovered that there's actually a mechanism for this in the central nervous system. There are these neurons in the brain, not just of human beings, but of primates, which, as it were, a kind of radar that pick up the intention of another person. So that, let's say you're threatening me. You're being angry, you're expecting me to be frightened. If I'm frightened, I echo back to your anger, and it's like these tuning forks are making the situation worse and worse, and off it goes. But if I refuse to go down that road, if I refuse to hate you, if I refuse to accept your deprecation, your humiliation of me, I'm sending out another signal that is picked up by your brain. This isn't just a question of you say, oh my gosh, he's not what I thought he was. This is something that's actually taking place in your nervous system. It doesn't mean that it'll always necessarily work, the way we want it to work. It doesn't mean that you don't have other control mechanisms within a human being. There's always something called free will. You can decide, no matter what your nervous system is telling you, or your genes, or your hormones, or God knows what all, you have free will and you can decide how you are going to respond. But it is very useful to know that what these nonviolent advocates have been saying down the centuries, that we can awaken the heart of another human being, has an actual physiological reality inside of us. All right, so I've said that this amazing scene in Birmingham was what we call a nonviolent moment. There's an old expression that political power grows out of the barrel of a gun. That may be true in many political systems, but if it is true, I think what this episode proves is that political power may grow out of the barrel of a gun, but nonviolent power grows out of the heart of a human being. And when these two powers are brought into juxtaposition, when they go head to head with one another, nonviolent power is infinitely more effective and precious and powerful than political power. And that's why Gandhi always tried to elevate the consciousness of his co-workers from the political to the spiritual. And when a lot of them kind of abandoned him after independence and people said, what's wrong? Why aren't they with you anymore? He made a famous quip. He said, well, I was on the train to Rishikesh and they got off in Delhi. Rishikesh is a place at the foothill of the Himalayas which is famous for its ashrams, and this is where sages go to practice meditation and so forth. Delhi, of course, is the center of political power. Now, let's ask ourselves one more thing about that nonviolent moment. A political movement, a campaign, like the campaign for civil rights in the U.S., the campaign for liberation from colonial domination in India, the campaign for the restitution of democracy in Eastern Europe, the campaign for the expulsion of the Marcos regime in the Philippines. You know, history is piling up more and more of these nonviolent episodes that have been successful. In fact, it's been calculated that more than half the world now lives in a country where nonviolence has played a significant role in the present regime in that country. So in all of these, none of these things happened in one moment. A nonviolent moment is very dramatic, it's beautiful, but the question we have to ask ourselves is, how do we get from a nonviolent moment to a campaign? The freedom struggle in India took 30 years. That's a lot of moments. And you cannot carry out that intense enthusiasm and that degree of risk indefinitely. Well, Gandhi worked out very good answers to that question, and other people have come up with additional ideas, and I'd like to explore some of them with you right now. But the thing that I want us to not lose sight of is that inner dimension. Because what happened to those marchers, which they called spiritual intoxication, without that change taking place in the human being, the nonviolent moment does not occur. And we have to think about that when we go long term. Okay, we can't expect people to be spiritually intoxicated indefinitely. So what do we do instead? Well, Thich Nhat Hanh said that you may believe in nonviolence, you may think you believe in nonviolence very deeply, but when you get into a confrontation and when, you know, people are threatening to punish you, abuse you, or they're actually doing it, your nonviolence is going to fly out the window unless you have a meditation practice. Because it's that meditation practice that enables you to stabilize that awareness of the truth within you, which simultaneously is an awareness of the truth in other people. That is a characteristic of spiritual knowledge. That when I find out that, guess what, there must be some kind of presence inside me that's protecting me from trouble that I otherwise would be getting into, because I'm from Brooklyn. When I discover that inside myself, I simultaneously become aware that it is present in everyone. That's a characteristic of spiritual awareness. So meditation is a surefire way of continuing to have that awareness even when the nonviolent moment is not there. The nonviolent moment shows us what we're capable of. It shows us what nonviolence is capable of when the opponent is affected by it. But we also have to be able to continue, to some degree at least, that awakening, that awareness that's inside of us over the long term. We have to have a way to not be reliant upon external circumstances, right? Do notice one thing. Those marchers did not know that the police and the firemen were waiting for them. They didn't plan for this. They have to be able to respond immediately. So, that's one thing, and that's the thing I'd like to emphasize most, which is the internal preparation, which can be made stable and carried out over a long term through disciplines, and nobody's pretending that this is fun, nobody's pretending that it's easy. I do this, and frankly, I have found this the most difficult thing that I do in my life, but it's also the most rewarding. So that's part of it, and that's the essential part, is that internal preparation that keeps us from getting burned out, that keeps us going as long as it is required. But there are other things that we can do in terms of a movement, and what Gandhi discovered very early on, actually, back in 1894, he discovered that you can rally people's enthusiasm about an abuse temporarily. But once they've confronted that abuse, they either will succeed or fail. Either way, they're going to stop. If they succeed, it's over. You know, people flock into Tahrir Square. Hosni Mubarak finally says, I resign. Terrific. Then what happens? Then the army is in charge of Egypt, you know. So once you succeed or you fail, if it's just a negative, it's something that you're against, you stop. The only thing, and this is very characteristic and wonderful about human beings, the only thing that's going to keep us going in the long run is a positive goal, something that we're working for. And for that, Gandhi invented something which later on he termed constructive program. It was a set of 18 projects which were designed to rebuild India by Indians without demanding anything of anybody, and regardless of what the paramount power or anybody else did. So there are both these external and these internal ways of taking that tremendous power of nonviolence and making it durable, turning it into a long-term campaign. I'm going to come back and explore some other aspects of this in our next talk, but I hope that this gives us an insight into the power and the potential of nonviolence. My spiritual teacher once very quietly said in my presence, I think he did it purposely, he said, that man, speaking of Gandhi, came back from South Africa having realized God and quietly set about solving every single problem in the modern world. So we're going to explore some of that other potential with you next time. Thanks very much.